I think we flirt a little bit and believe in our passive Christian culture, just believing when we function in white lies and little sins that we are not in rebellion to God. He knows my heart. Well, yeah, that's the problem. He does.
Psalms 51:10, and it says, create a clean heart in me and renew a right spirit within. The question is, what does that scripture really mean, specifically the right spirit within?
Well, I think just surface speaking, create a clean heart in me and renew a right spirit. Heart is in relationship to our soul, and our soul is in relationship to our spirit. And we know that we are both simultaneously natural, and we're spirit beings with a natural body, which means that we have a spirit. We have a spirit that might not be God's spirit unless we are subjected, or unless we subject it to God's spirit, or we lose our life that we might find it. And so I think that's it, is that the evidence of a wrong spirit is an unclean heart. Does that make sense? The evidence of of a wrong spirit is an unclean heart. And so that heart, the heart or the soul of a person, the mind and the heart, is where desire and passion and will is seated. And so, when our heart is unclean, or when our spirit is of a wrong spirit, the identification of that fleshes out in the actions of the heart and the mouth. The Bible tells us that, the heart and the mind. The Bible tells us that out of the abundance of the heart, the mouth speaks. So in how we, in our language and how we function, in our attitudes, in our associations, in our desires, and in our motives. Motive is probably the best word to be able to use for that. Our motives, when our motives are impure, then our actions obviously are defiled, and those things are bred by our own spirit that has not surrendered to God's spirit. And let's just be clear: the spirit of the enemy is not for us to say that the foolishness and the deception sometimes of mankind believing that they are not in submission or surrender or in service to the enemy, because they don't believe I guess they see or sense or feel like some type of an evil behavior and an evil being and an evil plot and an evil the sins and the actions that we've considered to be really evil and really dark, and so we can't be fooled to believe if that I'm just going to use the term devil worship. I know that sounds weird, but we're foolish to believe that we're not in satanic worship or devil worship when we're not bowing down to some red figure with horns. No. We have to remember that the spirit of the enemy is the spirit of self, right? And the spirit of the enemy is the spirit of self. That's why the first commandment of the satanic Bible is do as thou will. Not do as Satan wills, do as thou will. Why? Because the satanic spirit is the spirit of self. And so, when we are in disobedience, when we're in disobedience to God, there's not a response to God's desires and to be obedient to God's directions and commands. I think we flirt a little bit and believe too much in our passive culture, in our passive Christian culture, just believing when we function in white lies and little sins that we are not in rebellion to God. He knows my heart. Well, yeah, that's the problem. He does. And he knows that your little white lies and your little passive sins are complete rebellion. Because if you're not in 100% obedience to God, you're in disobedience to God. You can't be 99.5 obedient to God. That's disobedience to God, because God is either in or out. You're not lukewarm. And so we have to understand that we don't have to be engaged in satanic ritual and sacrifice and all of that to be in step and in relationship with the spirit of the enemy, which is the spirit of self. We just have to deny God's will for our own. Well, that's good right there. I ain't getting no help, but that's good. Okay, so in the same way, I mean, that's a palpable place of surrender, creating me a clean heart, renewing me a right spirit, right, that I displace mine for His.